Well, greetings to you. Um, Pray that so far you are having a wonderful Lord's Day. We are continuing our look at the patriarchs, those who from the very beginning have led to where we are today with the Christian faith. We looked at Abraham, we have looked at Isaac, and we have been looking at Jacob. And today we continue on with Jacob. When last we left off, Jacob had deceived his father through the urging of his mom to convince his father, who was nearly blind, that he was in fact Esau. And Esau, after finding this out, has made up his mind that he's going to kill his brother Jacob. So as we see here at this point where we're picking up, we're going to skip a little bit ahead. There's a lot that has gone on since Jacob has had to leave the family. He has left his mother and father behind, and as he is on his way to go look for his uncle Laban. And as he's going to find his uncle, he at one point ended up in a place where he had seen a vision of a ladder, and we'll get into that at another time. It was commonly referred to as Jacob's ladder today. But today we're going to skip way ahead. And if you would, please turn in chapter 29 to verse, let's see where's a nice spot to pick up. Pick up over here, if you would, in verse 4. Jacob's traveling. He runs into a bunch of into some guys who are there next to a well. They are getting ready to water their flocks and so on, but they're not really moving to do so. And just so that you could know, back then a well was covered by a very huge and heavy stone. Keep dust from getting in, keep it from evaporating from all the heat and so on. And we pick up here in verse 4. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." Verse 7. "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." So far it seems like such a joyful union. They're coming together. He has not seen his sister's son. They hadn't seen anybody that really from that side of the family in a while. At that point, even when they are getting ready to water the flocks and so on, what does Jacob see? He sees Rachel and he falls for Rachel. Let's keep going on. It says, after Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, he's staying with Laban now for a month. Laban said to him, verse 15, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." And listen to this reply. Verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." Now let's stop there for a moment. Now, there's been so much that has gone into what does it really mean when it said she had weak eyes. And it could mean a number of things. But one thing we know is this. As far as what's being described here, and in Jacob's eyes, because, very often beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But Jacob sees Rachel, and the Bible describes Rachel as beautiful. Beautiful in form, beautiful in figure. She was beautiful. And Leah, right here, probably compared to Rachel, in maybe most people's opinion, let's just say not described as such. Jacob falls in love with Rachel. Let me tell you something. When people say things like love is only about an emotional connection, or that it shouldn't be about physical, or that it's lust, that's nonsense most of the time. The fact of the matter is, you fall in love with who you fall in love with. If it is only a physical attraction, if that's all that it is, eventually those sort of things show themselves, reveal themselves, and they peter out. Another thing also is this: lust is different than love. And very often people confuse the two. And as we go a little further, perhaps you'll see how it plays out here. In verse 19, in verse 18, when Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Lust can't wait. It wants what it wants right now. Love is patient, the Bible says. Love is kind, as you know in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is a different sort of motivation. Love says that nothing will stop me from doing my best for this person, for this woman, for this man. And here he says, I'll work 7 years. He doesn't have a dowry. He doesn't have a whole lot of money to come and just say, here's what you normally would get, because that's normally what you do, especially in that sort of ancient civilization. Well, number one is that you normally, the older daughter gets married first, and also you have a dowry. You bring a certain amount of money that is given to the family. Not that you're purchasing the daughter, but that's what's commonly practiced, a dowry. And that, not just in the ancient civilization, that was practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years. But anyway, the point here is this: I'll give you 7 years for your daughter. I'll wait and I'll work that hard. There are a lot of people today that they wouldn't work 7 months for somebody that they claim they love. Let me tell you something about working for the one that you love. If you're thinking that, okay, well, we don't have that sort of practice today where I could grab a hammer and then start working on the farm. How about this? Are you even willing to work on your own character when you say you love someone? Are you willing to make the changes in your own life that you have to make when you say you love someone? Or are you the kind of person, and this is very common, when you ask people, well, why do you want to marry her? Why do you want to marry him? Well, this is how they make me feel. This is how I feel when I'm with her. Forget about how you feel. Forget about how he makes you feel. Forget about how she makes you feel. Forget about all that for a moment. A great deal of what really reveals pure love is what you want the other person to feel and experience. You take the focus off yourself. And over here, he is saying, I'll do anything for Rachel, including 7 years of my life. And believe me, I've known people who have selfishness, who have greed, who have scars from their past, and they are not willing to work on changing anything for the person they claim they love. Just keep going on, picking up in verse 19. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Okay, I trust this guy. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Because of his love for her, it did not seem like that huge a sacrifice. I've seen people like this. I've seen when a woman falls in love with a man and is willing to sacrifice. I've definitely seen when men have fallen in love with a woman, not lust, but in love. And no sacrifice seems too much. I've experienced that myself with my wife. No, it's not too much. You love her. 7 years, I'll work on what I got to work on to make her mine. Picking up in verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, this is after the 7 years, give me my wife. My time is completed. I want to make love to her. Now, when you read that right there, can you imagine that today, how that might come across? Most people not even think that's even in the Bible. Or did he kick the door down and said, hey, give me mine now? Is this lust being enacted? No. Making love back then meant making love. Sure, the two people came together, but I want my wife to love her. And not just the physical intimacy, but to give all the benefits of what it is when someone loves you. Anyway, he goes to Laban and says, give me my wife. It's been 7 years. Picking up in verse 22. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. Verse 24, and Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. So here's what goes on. It's amazing how much can happen in just a verse or two. But Laban, in the cover of darkness, because back then, okay, now the sun is set, it's the honeymoon night. It is a common custom, the way that a wedding was performed. You had a whole lot of people come over. You had your guests. You pour the wine. Everybody's festive and drinking. But the bride is hidden. Same thing as today when they say you're not supposed to see the bride in her wedding dress. Nowadays, people just jump in to say, I've seen everything before the wedding is even announced. Now it's like we've seen and done everything. See her in a wedding dress. She may not even have a wedding dress. We're going to kick the doors down, run down to the judge. And listen, depending on people's circumstances, that could mean anything. So this is not a shaming type of message. I'm just telling you that there is so much emphasis that is put on chastity, that is put on what a honeymoon can really be like. And if people have done things where the honeymoon has not been as God described it, let me tell you something. When a man and a woman repent and God gives them a fresh start, then a honeymoon can now be a honeymoon, because the Lord has his own supernatural way of pressing restart. But here at this point now, they're getting ready to get married. She's covered up in a veil. You can't tell who she is. And when I say veil, I mean veiled. Like you could barely even tell the figure actually of the person. And God, and just to throw this in real quick here, the Bible talks so much about the holiness and the holy of holies, about what it meant when the Bible talks about the church being the bride of Christ, and when the time when we will be perfected and revealed. What happened even in the heavenly realms, there is a veil that's described to us in the Bible. There's when God goes, when the bride goes behind the veil to see the bride that he is about to bring home. In the Old Testament, the priest would go to the back and go and enter into the area that's the Holy of Holies, where no one was allowed back there. Nobody, just because they said the name of God, meant that they could go into the Holy of Holies. That's how much God values marriage. He's describing the same sort of thing here. I'm giving you, of course, a very quick, truncated version of it, because we're not going into an in-depth explanation, but I hope you get the picture here. There are areas that are reserved, that once you put your foot on that side of the veil, you have entered into a very, very special holy place. And that's how God describes a woman and a bride. And here, she is veiled, completely covered up. Jacob has no idea. Now, Laban, of course, is playing a trick here, because he has switched the bride. He has taken his other daughter, Leah, covered her up, made sure that nobody could see and that nobody would say a word. And back then, the father was Lord and master. So what he says goes. So even the daughters, can you imagine the break in Rachel's heart because she loves Jacob? Can you imagine what that was like for her to watch her husband being given another woman and be part of the deception? And it's your dad doing it to your own heart? Well, they go behind. They have the honeymoon night. It's dark, it's night. Jacob has probably had a few. Not drunk, but it's a festive, dark time. And she's all covered up. And then he spends the night not knowing who he is with. Pick up here, if you would, in verse 25. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we'll give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years. And Jacob did so. Verse 28, he finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. 14 years Jacob works. 14 years of his life. 14 years, because that was how intense his love for Rachel was. If it had been lust, it would have worn out after the first 14 weeks at maximum. And that's being kind. You could wait. You could find somebody else. And the Bible doesn't go into great detail here. Of course, there's been love at first sight, but those things usually grow the closer you get to the person, the more you know, more to love. Well, here, he's been fooled by his father-in-law. Let me tell you something. You know the old saying about when you marry an entire family? That is so. But also, I'd like us to see something else here. Jacob deceived his father. Jacob manipulated his brothers. Rebekah helped in the deception. Rebekah had her husband deceived by her son. Deception, manipulation. Isaac had his favorite son, Esau. Rebekah had apparently her favorite, Jacob. All this dysfunction in one family. And sometimes the only way God can help you is to help you to run into somebody who's just like you. And Jacob has run into Laban. Laban is Jacob in so many ways. And when you think about it, who did Rebekah grow up with? She grew up with Laban. They've learned one way. You've heard of generational curses, and we'll be looking at demons sometime in the near future. But one of the things you often hear is about generational curses, generational demons. I tell you this, it's not like some magic demon comes and taps your kid on the shoulder and says, now they're going to be just like you. Whatever, poverty is going to follow. Alcoholism is going to follow. No, you become like what you're around. And what have they been around? Deception, manipulation. And now Jacob has run into himself. And sometimes, again, I want to make sure we're clear on this. The only ways that we can change very often is that we have to see us in someone else. You know, the greatest cure for self-righteousness is to meet somebody who's self-righteous. You know, the greatest cure very often for selfishness, for greed, is to meet someone who's better at it than you. You know what's the greatest cure for when you just always give in to your rage and your anger and your jealousy? Is to meet someone just like you. How about this? The things that you practice. Perhaps you're always practicing getting your own way. Perhaps you practice manipulation. Perhaps you're someone who's a brat. You're a brat. And now you run into a brat. That's one of the reasons why some parents have such a hard time with their own children. Though they don't recognize it, the kid is just like them. And there's nothing we hate more than seeing our sin in somebody else. And all of a sudden your child turns 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, and you're like, why won't they change? How come they don't listen? Why are they so rebellious? You know what my father would have done to me? You know what my mother would have done to me? Just because you're not doing it doesn't mean you don't feel like it, or that you haven't found some other way of disciplining that harshly. But it's because you can't stand what you have now seen, which is really you. God can work that door to his advantage. The only way to get Jacob straightened out, he had to spend some time with God, and he had to spend some time with himself in the form of Laban. But let's look at another part of this story. Jacob's in love with Rachel. What did it mean to Rachel to have a man work 14 years? You know why a lot of marriages fail? Because there are some people and some men that don't want to work 14 months. It's easy to get a job, and then all of a sudden, all you do day and night is complain about how hard your job is. We have a very, very soft underbelly. Maybe not even an underbelly, but there is certainly a soft portion of the generation today that has no understanding of hard work. Everything to them is overwhelming. Everything is too much. Everything is take this job and shove it. Everything is too much. They have no idea, like the prior generation, what it takes to win a family, to win a city, to win a country. They don't understand the value of hard work. There are many people, the reason why they struggle so much in their relationships is because they don't even have the value of understanding how much work it takes to make a marriage work and how much work it takes on yourself. Hardest people to help to grow and to change are nice people. I'm nice. What do I got to change? I'm nice. I'm sweet. I don't yell. I don't scream. And they are so completely deceived that years go by before they realize how much work they need to now start employing to become a real believer, a real disciple of Christ, a real imitation of Christ, a real wife, a real husband, a real son. 14 years we see here. But Jacob does it. He's been driven away from his family for the most part through his own doing, through a lot of his own doing. Did it break his mother's heart to watch him leave? Did it break the father's heart? I'm sure. They're the ones who urged him, go get a wife, but don't get one from here. Go to Haran, get a wife. And Esau, who wanted his brother's blood, they knew it was best for him to go. Do you think they stopped and thought about, what, man, did we set some things in motion here that really is our fault? Anyway, I don't want for us to just keep getting too much, pulling down too much as to what we can get from here and lose focus of what it is I'm hoping we walk away with here. In your life, are you willing to work? Are you willing to work along with God? Because God gives the guidance. He doesn't do it for you. He removes obstacles when he has a plan for you. He removes certain things, but there are some things he lets stay right there because it's good for your character and good for your heart, and it's good for your humility. Sometimes you're so frustrated. Why doesn't my wife change? Why? And it might take 14 years before you see it's really you. And vice versa. And how many kids are still waiting for their parents to get it and to understand? When really the problem is that they have to start working on them. So that's one thing. Another thing also is this: never mistake lust for love. Love motivates. Love empowers you. And spiritual, when God has okayed, and when God is saying, now this is a couple that I want to make things work with, that I'm going to pour my blessing on them, and they have humbled themselves, man, God will give you the strength to have the patience you need. So what else are we seeing here? You need patience. And love will supply that. Lust won't. Another thing you're seeing here is this: you'll run into yourself when you see yourself, or when you have some unreasonable anger towards somebody. Understand it might be you that you're looking at. 3, there is nothing that can help us change like seeing our own actions. It may not be an exact replication of yourself in seeing yourself. Sometimes it's just some things that you do. You all heard what goes around comes around. Or you've heard of karma. Well, God's not into karma. God's into making you into the image of his son, Jesus Christ. And sometimes the best way to do that, it's not to punish. God doesn't punish his children. God punishes unbelievers. God disciplines his children. And sometimes we are so resistant to the discipline we need for a successful life that he has to help you have your own actions come around to you, for you to see it and get it and say, oh my goodness, it's the same thing I did. Jacob says, my goodness, the same thing I did to my dad, making believe I was Esau, putting hair on my arms, making sure that he thought I was him so he could give me the blessings. And now the exact same thing has happened to me. Sometimes we're so spiritually dull, we may not see it. But there are those who are sharp enough spiritually through the Holy Spirit that all of a sudden your eyes open wide and say, oh my goodness, this is me. I've seen that. I've seen some women change greatly because Christian women who have seen the result of their actions and seen God's loving hand to change them. I've seen young people like that who have changed something in their life because somehow they have finally seen it clearly through the actions of someone else, what they had done or what they have been doing. I've seen men grow. I've seen good guys grow into great guys. I've seen good men become great men because somehow they had to hit the bottom by seeing themselves and their actions played out and even go against them through the actions of someone else. That's God's loving discipline. So, my friends, I hope this has been helpful. Laban, Leah, Rachel, and for Laban to say, hey, it's okay to deceive this man. It's okay for my daughters to have their hearts broken. What was it like for Leah to wake up and look into the eyes of a man who did not want her? Is there any greater pain than that? You've given everything. You've unveiled yourself. This is not some prostitute. This is not some trollop. This is not some girl who would just give herself to any man. Some women couldn't care. Matter of fact, they might try to get pregnant on purpose, even though they know that the man doesn't want them. And now I got somebody to take care of my kids, or I'll keep him, or I'll trap him. There's a million things people do with sex, but not when there's a girl now who didn't ask for this. And now you wake up and you look into the eyes of a man who wants to know, where's your sister? There's a lot of heartache that comes around with manipulation, my friends. Don't ever think that your deception, your manipulation, your selfishness, doing things to get what you think you deserve or what you want, don't think there's not going to be a price to pay. There are many people whose marriages suffered forever, suffered for years and years and years, even believers, because there was some deception that went on. There was some deception that went on. And whether the woman now feels rejected and unwanted, or the man feels like a chump and feels like a fool, they may come together. You can say, I love you, I love you, I love you. They may even believe you love them. But there's a part that you have to put some work in, maybe 14 years, to undo some of the emotional damage that has now been triggered in your marriage. Don't ever think manipulation is a means to get God's will done, or your own, or that there won't be a price to pay. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for joining us. Till the next time that we meet for The Word is Love, sponsored by the Bronx Christian Church, I pray that you will have a week in which you spend in clear transparency, relying on the Lord and not relying on your own ways to get your means, or to get your desires fulfilled. It just doesn't work. God bless you.